They said an empire collapsed because one body was too heavy. They were wrong. It was saved by the weight they mocked. Stay with us to see how humanity turned shame into strength. Where are you watching from? Subscribe and join the story. Ronan Pike had spent 15 years fixing things nobody else wanted to touch. Rusted hulls in the Gulf, cracked solar panels on orbital debris, busted life support systems held together with spit and spite. At 35, his hands told the story better than his mouth ever could. Scarred knuckles, burn marks from bad welds, calluses that made shaking hands with corporate types uncomfortable. The Argus fare was supposed to be simple. Win the salvage competition, collect the prize money, get back to New Orleans before the rent came due. The competition itself was brutal, but straightforward. Retrieve a disabled cargo pod from a decaying orbit around the gas giant Nereus while fighting partial gravity and radiation flares. Ronan did what he always did. He improvised, used the planet's magnetic field to slingshot himself into position while the fancy pilots burned fuel trying to muscle through. When they announced his name as the winner, the crowd's applause felt like static. Ronan just wanted the credit chip and a quiet ride home. Emperor Kaur Vial did not do quiet. The Vial Emperor rose from his observation box, his angular frame wrapped in robes that seemed to reject light itself. His expression held the kind of fury that comes from losing to someone you consider beneath contempt. "Double the wager," Kaur announced, his voice cutting through the celebration. "The human wants a prize? Let him take responsibility. For 30 days he will serve as guardian to my daughter Lysaria. Return her intact and silent, and the original prize is his. Fail, and he forfeits all claim." Ronan's stomach dropped. This wasn't a prize. It was a trap. The contract appeared on his datapad before he could protest. Legal language wrapped around a simple truth. He'd just become a political pawn. The crowd murmured, cameras whirred, and somewhere in the Imperial section, a figure moved. Lysaria Vale descended the stairs like someone expecting the floor to give way. She was tall, almost Ronan's height, with skin that caught the station's lights and turned them amber. Her hair moved like liquid mercury, and her eyes held that particular shade of silver that meant vile nobility. But where other vile were sharp angles and cold aesthetics, she had curves that her empire considered excessive. Ronan had seen the feeds, heard the whispers. In a culture that worshipped the ascetic, she was called excess. She kept her eyes down as she approached. The docking bay was all hard edges and recycled air. Wind from the ventilation system cut through Ronan's jacket. He saw her shiver once, barely, before forcing stillness back into her shoulders. He shrugged off his work jacket, the one with the patched elbow and oil stains that never quite washed out, and held it toward her. "Here, wind's cold." She looked at the jacket like it was a test. "I do not typically feel cold." "Yeah, well, I'm offering anyway." Her fingers, long and careful, took the jacket. She pulled it on, and something in her posture shifted. Not quite relaxation, but close. Cameras clicked. Ronan realized, with the kind of clarity that comes too late, that this was going to be a problem. Behind them, her father watched from his viewing box, face carved from ice and rage. The jacket hung loose on her shoulders as she followed Ronan toward the transport ship. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them looked back. The bet was made. The clock was running. And somewhere in the cold mathematics of imperial politics, 12 human colonies hung in the balance, waiting to see if a welder from Louisiana could keep a princess intact and silent for 30 days. Ronan thought about his ex-wife's voice, the last thing she'd said before signing the papers. "You're just a man who fixes broken things. You'll never be more than that." He looked at Lysaria, wrapped in his old jacket, mercury hair catching starlight. Maybe Maeve was right. Maybe she was wrong. Either way, the ship was waiting, and New Orleans was calling him home. New Orleans hit Lysaria like a wall of sensation. The transport shuttle touched down at the private dock near the 9th Ward, and the moment the doors opened, she stopped breathing. Then she breathed again, deeper this time, like someone remembering how. The air smelled like river water, cooking spices, and something green she couldn't name. Music drifted from somewhere close, a trumpet line that bent notes the way her people bent light. People moved on the street with a rhythm she'd never seen in the imperial halls, where every step was measured and every gesture controlled. Ronan's workshop sat above the waterline, barely, a converted boathouse with a sign that read, "Pike Salvage and Repair" in faded letters. Inside it smelled like metal and coffee and work. "You hungry?" Ronan asked, not looking at her as he dumped his bag on a workbench. "I can sustain without immediate nutrition." "That's not what I asked." He took her to a place called Verti Marte, open all night, where a woman with paint-splattered hands served them something wrapped in paper. "Po' boy," Ronan called it, fried shrimp on bread that crackled when she bit down. Lysaria took one bite and laughed. The sound came out of her unbidden, bright and loud, echoing off the close walls. She covered her mouth immediately, but the damage was done. Around them people smiled. No one looked shocked. No one whispered about propriety. Ronan froze, sandwich halfway to his mouth, staring at her like she'd just spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. "When was the last time you laughed like that?" he asked quietly. She couldn't remember. They ate in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence. Comfortable, almost. Back at the workshop, Ronan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his jaw tightened. Maeve, his ex-wife. He rejected the call, then the second one, then the third. Finally he answered. The conversation was brief and brutal. Legal threats about the property, questions about the alien princess, insinuations wrapped in lawyer speak. When he hung up, his hands were shaking. "Past coming back?" Lysaria asked. "Always does," he muttered. That night, a storm rolled in from the Gulf, real weather, uncontrolled and wild. Lysaria stood on the workshop's balcony, watching lightning paint the sky purple-white. Rain hammered the river, and thunder shook the walls. She started crying. Not from fear, from something else, something that didn't have a word in her language or his. Ronan found her there, soaked through, staring at the chaos like it was a miracle. "You okay?" "In the palace," she said, voice raw. "Climate is controlled, optimized. I have never seen an angry sky. I have never felt weather that did not care about my comfort." He stood beside her, getting wet, saying nothing. "Is it always this beautiful when things are falling apart?" she asked. Ronan thought about his marriage, his business, the way everything good in his life had a habit of breaking. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, it kind of is." Inside, she borrowed dry clothes, one of his old t-shirts, engineering conference from 2508, and sweatpants that bunched at her ankles. She looked nothing like a princess. She looked real. They made coffee at 2 a.m. while rain drummed the roof. She asked about Earth, about fixing things, about why he'd chosen salvage work. He asked about the Empire, about growing up royal, about what angry sky meant in Vale. There wasn't a translation. The next morning, a figure appeared at the workshop door, tall, angular, wearing the silver uniform of the Imperial Guard. Captain Severn, Lysaria's childhood tutor and protector. His eyes swept over the modest space, the cluttered workbenches, Ronan in his stained coveralls, and Lysaria wearing human clothes, before settling into an expression of pure disdain. "Princess," he said, the word sharp as a blade, "I have come to protect you from these humans." He looked at Ronan the way you'd look at something stuck to your boot. Lysaria straightened, still wearing Ronan's shirt, and met Severn's eyes without flinching. "I did not ask for protection, Captain." "Your father did. I have my orders." The workshop felt smaller suddenly. 3 people, 2 worlds, and 30 days that were starting to feel like a countdown to something worse than failure. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming. But inside Pike Salvage and Repair, another storm was just beginning. Severn wanted to take her back to the orbital hotel. Proper quarters, proper security, proper distance from the human who'd somehow won her as a prize. Lysaria said no. The word came out quiet but absolute. Ronan watched the captain's face cycle through surprise, anger, and something that looked almost like hurt before settling back into rigid professionalism. "Princess, your safety is my decision," she finished. "I stay." Ronan cleared his throat. "She stays if she wants to stay. That's the deal." Severn's hand drifted toward his sidearm, not threatening, just habitual. "And what exactly qualifies you to make that determination, salvage worker?" "Same thing that qualified me to win your Emperor's bet. I show up and do the work." The tension could have cut steel. Finally, Severn nodded once, sharp and military. "Then I will remain as well, to observe." Great, Ronan thought. A babysitter with a plasma pistol. The next few days fell into an awkward rhythm. Severn watched from corners, taking notes on a datapad, cataloging every human interaction like evidence for a trial. Lysaria navigated between two worlds, trying to honor her father's expectations while reaching for something else. Something that tasted like freedom. Ronan taught her to weld. It started practical, a leak in the gutter over his workbench, rain dripping onto his toolbox. He showed her how to hold the torch, how to move the bead smooth and steady. Her hands were elegant but clumsy at first, more accustomed to ceremonial gestures than actual labor. Sparks flew. One caught in her mercury hair, and she yelped, then laughed, then cursed in Vielle. Ronan couldn't help it. He laughed too. Severn watched from the doorway, expression unreadable. "You are teaching the princess manual labor," he observed. "I'm teaching her a skill," Ronan corrected. Big difference. That afternoon, news feeds started buzzing. Someone had leaked photos. Lysaria in human clothes. Lysaria eating street food. Lysaria laughing. The headlines wrote themselves, "Princess Excess and the Scrap Collector. Humanity's latest acquisition. Vielle dignity at all-time low." The worst one came from an Imperial blogger named Cascade, a failed businessman who'd competed against Ronan in the past and lost every time. His article was titled, "Cultural Contamination: Why the Bet Was a Mistake." It included speculation, thinly veiled threats, and a call for investigation into whether Ronan was properly equipped to handle an Imperial charge. Lysaria saw the feeds. Her face went still, the kind of still that comes before breaking. Ronan shut down the displays. "Hey, those people don't know anything. They know what I am," she said quietly. "Excess, too much. Wrong shape, wrong size, wrong presence for a Veil princess." "Who told you that?" She didn't answer with words. Instead, she pulled up a memory file on her datapad. Security footage from the Imperial Palace dated 12 years ago. A young Lysaria, maybe 13, walking through a courtyard while courtiers watched. The audio was muted, but their faces said everything. Smirking, judging. One made a gesture, hands spreading wide, mimicking curves. Young Lysaria kept walking, head up, but her hands shook. "They called me the Abundance," she said, meant as mockery. "My father never corrected them. In vile culture, aesthetic purity is divine. I am impure." Ronan felt rage, clean and sharp, but swallowed it. Anger wouldn't help. "Come on," he said. "I want to show you something." He took her to the fish market near the docks, Severn trailing like a judgmental shadow. Vendors called out prices in 3 languages, and the air smelled like salt and ice and life. When they saw Lysaria, a group of women working the stalls stopped what they were doing. "Lord child, look at you," one of them said, abandoning her counter. "That bone structure. Girl, you are a whole masterpiece." They circled her like artists appraising a sculpture, fixed her hair, adjusted her jacket, debated her best colors. They weren't mocking, they were celebrating. No agendas, no politics, just honest admiration. "You ever need a job? You come work here?" another woman said. Face like that, we'd sell out by noon. Lysaria stood frozen, eyes wet, while these strangers treated her like treasure. Ronan watched her shoulders shake with something between laughter and sobs. Behind them, even Severn's expression had softened, just slightly. That night, the other hammer dropped. Kaur Vial appeared on every major feed simultaneously, his image cold and absolute. The trial of Bond is called. In 48 hours, the human guardian will demonstrate his worth at the Argus Ring. Fail, and the contract ends. All treaties will be reviewed. The feed cut. The workshop fell silent. Lysaria looked at Ronan, fear naked on her face. If you fail, my father cancels trade agreements. 12 human colonies lose their shipping routes. Thousands of jobs. Entire communities. Yeah, Ronan said quietly. I got that. Severn stepped forward, and for the first time, his voice wasn't hostile. What will you do? Ronan grabbed his travel pack and started loading tools. Same thing I always do. Show up and do the work. Outside, night settled over New Orleans. The city hummed with life, unaware that somewhere in orbit, a clock was ticking down to judgment. The ship Severn had arrived in was military-grade Vale design, all efficiency and no comfort. 3 seats, cramped quarters, and recycled air that tasted like disappointment. They lifted off from New Orleans at dawn, the city shrinking below them until it became a memory. Severn piloted in silence, hands steady on controls that responded to his thoughts as much as his touch. Ronan sat in the co-pilot seat, running mental calculations about what kind of trial waited for them. Lysaria occupied the rear station, her fingers dancing across a language pad. After an hour of nothing but engine hum, she spoke. Ronan, would you like to learn some Vial? He glanced back. Why? Because when we arrive, people will speak it, and I would like you to understand what they are saying about you. Over the next 6 hours, she taught him the basics. Greeting phrases, numbers, insults that masqueraded as compliments. Ronan's accent was terrible, his grammar worse, but he tried. That seemed to matter to her. You sound like you are chewing rocks, she said, almost smiling. But your intent is clear. That counts for much. Even Severn looked slightly less disapproving. Somewhere past Luna's orbit, Ronan's tablet pinged with a news alert. Cascade had posted another article, this one with schematics of the Argus Ring's environmental systems. Technically public information, but the timing felt deliberate. The article discussed potential vulnerabilities and stress test scenarios. He is positioning himself, Severn observed, reading over Ronan's shoulder. If you fail, he claims prescience. If you succeed, he claims the trial was insufficiently challenging. You know this guy? I know his type. They exist in every empire. Scavengers who feed on conflict. Ronan filed the information away. Problem for later. They ate dinner from ration packs. Severn had brought Vale's standard nutrition, perfectly balanced and utterly bland. Ronan had smuggled aboard 3 cans of gumbo from a place on Magazine Street. He heated one up, and the smell filled the cabin. Severn frowned. That aroma is unusually complex. Want to try it? The captain hesitated, culture and curiosity warring on his face. Finally, he accepted a small portion, tasted it. His frown deepened, but then he held out his bowl again. More. Lysaria caught Ronan's eye and almost smiled. Small victories. As they approached the Argus Ring, Lysaria moved to sit beside Ronan. Her voice dropped low, private. I need to tell you something. About the trial. About what is really at stake. I know. The colonies. The trade routes. No, more than that. She pulled up a document on her datapad, classified Imperial seal at the top. The contract has a clause, a secret one. If I bring shame to my father during these 30 days, he can void not just trade agreements but mutual defense pacts. 3 border systems would lose Earth's protection. The Kresh have been waiting for that. They would attack within a month. Ronan felt cold. How many people live in those systems? 2 billion, give or take. And you're telling me this now? Because now you need to know what you are carrying. It is not just me, it is them. The weight settled on Ronan's shoulders like an old friend. He'd spent his whole life carrying things that were too heavy, too broken, too important to drop. Okay, he said quietly. Then we don't drop it. The Argus ring appeared ahead of them, a massive torus rotating slowly around the gas giant Nereus. Lights glittered along its circumference like a jeweled bracelet on the wrist of the universe. Beautiful, deadly, home to 2 million souls who had no idea they were about to become players in someone else's game. Severn guided them into docking approach. That's when the alarm started. Red lights flashed across the station. Emergency channels crackled to life. Voices shouted in 6 languages, all saying the same thing. Containment failure, ammonia leak, Section 7 going critical. Severn's hands flew over the controls, pulling up system diagnostics. Environmental controls are cascading. This is not random failure. Someone sabotaged them. Through the viewport, Ronan saw escape pods launching, tiny seeds of light fleeing the ring. Sections of the station were going dark, life support failing, gravity fluctuating. Lysaria's calm chirped. Her father's face appeared, smaller than life but twice as cold. The trial begins now. Save my station, human, or lose everything. The feed cut. Ronan looked at the chaos spreading across the ring, at the people fleeing, at the clock that had just started counting down to catastrophe. He thought about duct tape and determination, about how every problem was just a puzzle that bled. Severn, can you get us to Dock 7? In this chaos? Possibly. Why? Because that's where the environmental junction is, and because someone needs to stop this before people die. This is not your responsibility, Severn said. This is a setup, a test designed for failure. Ronan was already pulling on his work vest, checking his toolkit, loading his portable welder. Yeah, well, I'm good at those. Lysaria stood, her face set with determination that looked a lot like fear wearing armor. Then we fail together. The ship shuddered as Severn pushed the engines harder than recommended. Outside, the Argus ring spun like a wounded animal, bleeding light and hope into the vacuum. And somewhere in the chaos, Cascade was probably smiling, watching his plan unfold exactly as designed. The bet had become a battlefield. The prize had become people. And Ronan Pike, welder and salvage worker, was about to show an empire what humanity meant. The docking clamps barely held as Severn slammed the ship into port. Artificial gravity flickered, pulling them sideways, then dropping to 30%. Ronan's stomach lurched, but his hand stayed steady. The airlock opened to chaos. People ran in all directions, some toward escape pods, others toward loved ones, most just running because movement felt like control. The ammonia leak had spread to 3 sections, the toxic cloud visible as a yellow-green haze behind emergency seals that wouldn't hold much longer. A station engineer grabbed Ronan's arm, desperation overriding protocol. Docking bridge to modules 3 and 4 collapsed. 200 people trapped on the other side, and the seals are failing. We have maybe 20 minutes before the atmosphere vents. Ronan looked at the gap. 15 meters of empty space between the main hub and the isolated module, debris floating in the void like mechanical sharks. No time to manufacture a proper bridge, no equipment rated for emergency construction. He turned to Severn. Your ship, it has magnetic anchor cables? For emergency maneuvering. Yes, why? Because I'm about to violate several engineering codes and probably a few laws of physics. Ronan worked fast. He stripped the magnetic cables from Severn's ship, commandeered every loose piece of metal plating he could find, and started welding. Not a bridge exactly. More like a road made of prayer and spite. He used the station's own superstructure as anchor points, running cables through support beams and creating a web of magnetic fields that would, theoretically, hold metal plates in place long enough for people to cross. Lysaria appeared at his elbow. What do you need? Can you speak Trader Standard and Vael? Oh, and Kresh, and Borean, and basic Terran sign. Then get on the comm and coordinate the evacuation. Tell them to move slow, stay magnetic, and trust the bridge. She took the station's emergency broadcast system, and her voice rang out, calm and clear, in language after language. Explaining, encouraging, giving people something to believe in when everything was falling apart. The makeshift bridge held, barely. It swayed and creaked, magnetic fields straining against mass and momentum. Ronan went first, testing each plate, his portable welder throwing sparks that looked like stars in the low light. Behind him, people followed. Severn materialized out of the chaos, plasma rifle slung across his back, directing traffic with the kind of authority that came from a lifetime of command. When debris threatened to strike the bridge, he physically blocked it, using his armored body as a shield. His back was to Ronan. Trust, forced by necessity. It was happening. 200 people, crossing a bridge that shouldn't exist, while an alien princess coordinated their escape and a vile captain protected a human's back. Somewhere in the confusion, someone's personal radio started playing music. Old Earth jazz, a riff that sounded like the opening of an ancient anime. Bebop, maybe. The tinny sound shouldn't have mattered, but it did. People moved to that rhythm, found their courage in it. Ronan recognized the tune. Tank. He'd watched Cowboy Bebop reruns as a kid, dreaming of space. Now, here he was, building roads through the void while jazz played, and people who'd never heard of Earth trusted him with their lives. The last person crossed. The bridge held. Somewhere in the station's observation deck, Emperor Kaur watched, his expression unreadable. The crowd on the safe side erupted, cheering, crying, embracing. An elderly Kreshwoman hugged Lysaria so hard they both stumbled. A human child gave Ronan a candy bar, half-melted and precious. But Ronan was watching the status displays. The core system readings were getting worse, not better. The sabotage had gone deeper than environmental controls. Severn, pull up the station schematic. The captain's fingers flew over a commandeered terminal. His face went pale, which for a Vial meant something was very, very wrong. The reactor core's magnetic containment is destabilizing. Someone corrupted the balance algorithms. A station engineer nearby heard them. Her voice cracked. The main module, housing section, 300 people, including the governor's family. It's going to break free. When it does, the spin will tear it apart. Ronan felt the weight of those words. 300. Not a number. People. Lives. Stories that ended if he failed. How long? 8 minutes. Maybe less. Lysaria stood beside him, her hand finding his without thought. What do we do? On every screen, feeds showed the same image. The main housing module, lights flickering, beginning to separate from the ring's superstructure. A death sentence in slow motion. Ronan ran calculations. Mass, momentum, counterweight, time. Every equation came up short. They needed something heavy enough to anchor the module, strong enough to withstand the shearing forces, and position precisely at the stress point. We need ballast, he said aloud. Something with mass that we can position at the breakpoint. Without it, that module becomes a coffin. Severn pulled up cargo manifests. Nothing suitable within reach. Everything heavy is locked down in cargo sections we cannot access in time. Ronan's mind raced. Portable generators? Too light. Structural beams? Too rigid. Water tanks? Already drained as a safety measure during the leak. On the screens, the module shuddered. 6 minutes. A maintenance worker ran past, shouting into his comm about evacuation priorities, about who would live and who would die when the math ran out of mercy. Lysaria watched the screens, her silver eyes tracking the module's rotation, calculating something in her head. When she looked at Ronan, he saw the answer before she spoke it, and it made his blood run cold. 20 years earlier, in the crystal gardens of the Vael Palace, a 12-year-old girl learned what her body meant to her people. The memory played in Lysaria's mind as she watched the station fall apart. She'd been practicing ceremonial poses for her coming-of-age presentation, and the courtiers had gathered to observe. She remembered the weight of their stares, the way conversation stopped when she entered, then resumed in whispers. "Such an abundance of form," one had said, voice carrying across the garden's perfect acoustics. "How unfortunate for His Majesty." Another had replied, "Perhaps she'll grow into elegance, though at this rate she'll grow into a freight hauler." Laughter, polite, cutting, the kind that left no visible wounds. Her tutor, young Severn, had stood at attention, saying nothing. Because what could he say? Truth was truth in the vile empire. Beauty was mathematics, purity was angles, and she was excess. That night she'd stopped eating. For 3 months, until her father noticed and commanded her to resume. Not out of concern, she realized later, but because a princess who starved was more shameful than one who simply failed to meet aesthetic standards. Now, watching 300 people about to die, she understood something about weight, about mass, about how the thing you carry can save or destroy you depending on where you choose to stand. "Ronan," she said quietly, "we have the ballast we need." He looked at her. Understanding hit him like a physical blow. "No, absolutely not. Calculate it. My mass, my density, positioned at the shear point, the numbers work. There has to be another way." "In 5 minutes? Show me." She could see him running through options, each one failing faster than the last. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage at a universe that kept demanding impossible choices. Behind them, Severn was accessing security logs, his face growing harder with each file he opened. "I found the source of the sabotage. Cascade." He inserted Cascade algorithms into the environmental systems 3 days ago. This was not a test. This was mass murder dressed as mechanical failure. Ronan's tablet chirped, a message from Cade himself sent to a public channel. Some systems are too broken to fix. Sometimes the best solution is to let them fail and rebuild from scratch. Natural selection, Pike. You should understand. The message had been sent 2 minutes ago, from a departing shuttle. Cade was already running. "He's trying to kill everyone on this station," Severn said, voice hollow, "to prove some point about human inadequacy, or to profit from the chaos, or both." On the main screen, Emperor Kaur's face appeared. His private line to Severn crackled to life. "Captain, remove the princess. That is an order." Severn looked at Lysaria, at Ronan, at the screen showing 300 faces pressed against viewports, children held close, hope dying in real time. He disconnected the comm. "I believe," he said slowly, "that I am experiencing technical difficulties with my communications array." 4 minutes left. Ronan grabbed Lysaria's shoulders. "Listen to me. If we do this, you could die. The stress, the heat from the welding, the force when that module locks." "Then I die having chosen," she said. "My father wagered my form as if it were an object. I will prove it has value, not as currency, as consequence. Lysaria, I was given a vile name that means one who bends light. But I have spent my life trying to bend myself instead. No more." Her eyes held his. "Will you help me stand, or will you make me do it alone?" He'd fixed broken things his whole life. Ships, systems, salvage deemed beyond repair. But this was different. This was watching someone offer themselves as the solution and knowing, with absolute certainty, that she was right. "Severn," he said, voice rough, "can you position her exactly where I tell you?" "Yes." "Then we move. Now." They ran through corridors where gravity failed in patches, where air tasted wrong and lights flickered like dying stars. Lysaria moved with unexpected grace, her body understanding motion the way Ronan understood metal. The shear point was a nightmare. Superstructure twisted under strain, cables singing with tension, the module beginning its fatal separation, 300 people on one side, the void on the other, and a gap that demanded sacrifice to close. Ronan had his welding rig, his cables, his improvised anchors. He had Severn's strength and discipline. He had 4 minutes that felt like 4 seconds. He had Lysaria, standing at the edge of metal and mercy, taking off her jacket to reveal the form her empire had mocked. "Where do you need me?" she asked. He told her. The exact point where force and mass would intersect, where her body would become the counterweight that held catastrophe at bay. She walked to that point like she was walking to a throne. Severn helped position her, his hands gentle despite their armor. "Princess," he said quietly, "it has been my honor to serve you. Then serve me by making sure everyone gets home. Captain." 3 minutes. Ronan started welding anchor points, the torch spitting stars. The module groaned, metal screaming, beginning to tear. Lysaria planted her feet, braced her back against the cold steel, and reached for the cable Ronan threw her. "My father wagered my form," she said, voice carrying across every comm channel on the station, broadcast to everyone watching. "I wager my weight, and I dare physics to tell me I am excessive now." She pulled the cable tight. Ronan secured the anchor. Severn positioned the emergency struts, and the universe held its breath. The moment Lysaria took the weight, Ronan understood why some acts of courage look like stillness. She didn't move, couldn't move. The cable sang with tension, transmitting every vibration from the dying module through her body. Her feet magnetized to the deck, her spine pressed against the support strut. She became part of the station's skeleton. The shearing force hit immediately. Lysaria gasped, the sound raw and animal, as physics tried to tear her apart. But she held. Her body, the one her empire called excessive, the one she'd spent 20 years apologizing for, distributed the load across muscle and bone in ways no mechanical system could replicate. Ronan's hands moved on instinct. He'd welded in zero gravity, in combat zones in the Gulf during hurricane season. This was worse. Every spark that flew could hurt her. Every second of heat could burn through her suit, but stopping meant 300 people died. "Talk to me," he said, working faster than he'd ever worked. "Stay with me, Lysaria." "I am here." Her voice was strained, tight with pain. "How long?" 2 minutes, maybe less. "Then I have time." Severn was beside her suddenly, magnetic boots locked down, his arms taking some of the cable's weight. Ronan saw the captain's hands, ungloved, skin blistering against the hot metal. Vael physiology didn't handle heat well. Every second Severn held on was agony. "Captain," Lysaria managed, "you will lose your hands. Then I will learn to salute with my feet." He pulled harder. "I have served your father for 30 years, Princess. I have watched you grow from child to woman while pretending I did not see you. But I see you now, and I will not look away when you need me most." The module groaned, the rotation trying to tear it free. Ronan welded anchor after anchor, building a cage of metal around the breakpoint. Sparks rained down on Lysaria's shoulders, her hair. She turned her face away but didn't let go. Above them, every screen in the station showed this moment. 3 people holding a world together through sheer, stubborn refusal to break. In the observation deck, Emperor Kaur stood frozen, watching his daughter become something his empire had no words for. In the housing module, people pressed against the viewports, seeing their salvation take the form of a princess, and a welder, and a captain who'd all decided that death was optional today. "Final weld," Ronan called out. 30 seconds. The torch flared, metal fused, the anchor locked, but the module's momentum had built too much. One more rotation and the stress would exceed what human hands and Vael's strength could hold. "We need more time," Severn grated out. "Just 10 seconds more." The cable slipped, microscopically, but enough. Lysaria screamed, the force yanking her forward, threatening to throw her into the gap. Ronan dropped the torch and grabbed her waist, adding his weight, his muscle, every ounce of strength he'd built, hauling salvage and fixing broken things. His world narrowed to her, to this moment, to the choice between letting go and holding on. "I've got you," he said into her ear. "I've got you." "You have 300, she gasped back. "Finish the weld. Not without you." The station's AI, recognizing the pattern, activated emergency protocols. Magnetic clamps engaged throughout the section. Additional struts deployed from hidden housings. The system was compensating, giving them the 10 seconds they needed. Ronan snatched up the torch one-handed, the other arm still around Lysaria. He finished the weld, the bead rough but solid, the anchor secure. The module shuddered one final time, then stopped rotating. Locked, stable, safe. The cable went slack in Lysaria's hands. She collapsed forward, and Ronan caught her, lowering them both to the deck. Severn released the cable, and his hands were raw meat, third-degree burns that would scar forever. Silence. 3 seconds of it, stretching like eternity. Then from the housing module, from every corridor, from every comm channel, sound erupted. Cheering, crying, languages mixing into one voice that said the same thing in every tongue. Alive, alive, alive. Ronan held Lysaria, checking her for injuries. Burns on her shoulders, deep bruises forming on her back, her hands shaking with shock and adrenaline. But alive. "You did it," he said. "We did it." She looked up at him, mercury eyes bright with tears and triumph. 300 people. We carried 300 people. Severn knelt beside them, cradling his ruined hands. His expression was something Ronan had never seen before. Pride. Genuine, uncomplicated pride. "Princess," he said formally, "I have served the Vale Empire for 3 decades. I have witnessed emperors crowned and wars won, but I have never seen courage like I saw today. Not from you. From what you have always been." The crowd that had gathered began to applaud. Softly at first, then building like thunder. Workers, families, merchants, soldiers, every species and culture on the station united in gratitude. Lysaria tried to stand, stumbled, let Ronan help her up. Together, they faced the applause. Somewhere above them, on a screen the size of a wall, Emperor Kaur watched his daughter receive the love of people who owed her their lives. His face showed nothing, but he closed his eyes, just for a moment, as if something inside him had finally broken. Medical teams arrived. They tried to take Lysaria to the infirmary. She refused until Severn was treated first. They compromised. Side-by-side beds in a commandeered supply room, emergency supplies and tired medics doing what they could. Ronan stayed. Nobody could make him leave. As they bandaged Lysaria's shoulders, she looked at him and smiled. Exhausted, in pain, her hair full of metal dust and her dress ruined beyond repair. Beautiful in the way that matters. Outside the supply room, the crowd refused to disperse. They brought offerings, food, flowers, children's drawings, tokens of thanks that piled up like a wall of gratitude. And somewhere in the debris field, Cascade's shuttle fled toward the outer colonies, leaving behind the chaos he'd created and the people who'd refused to let it win. Lysaria woke to coffee. Bad coffee. The kind that came from station dispensers calibrated for stimulation rather than flavor. But it smelled like earth and morning, and when she opened her eyes, Ronan was sitting beside her bed holding the cup like an offering. "Hey," he said. "Welcome back." Her hands were bandaged. Her shoulders ached with a deep, bone-level pain that told her she'd pushed her body past limits it didn't know it had. But she was alive, and the module's gravity indicator on the wall showed stable green. "Did we?" Everyone made it. All 300. Stations in emergency repair mode, but functional. No fatalities. She took the coffee, sipped it, made a face. "This is terrible." "Yeah, best I could find at 0400 station time." "It tastes like home," she said, and meant it. Severn lay in the next bed, his hands wrapped in regenerative bandages that glowed faintly blue. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. "Captain," Lysaria said quietly, "your hands will heal slowly, with scars." He turned his head to look at her. "I consider them well earned, a reminder that sometimes service requires sacrifice." not just obedience. A medic came to check vitals, clucking over Lysaria's injuries like a concerned grandmother. You should rest for at least 48 hours. Those burns need time to... I will rest when the hearing is concluded. Because there would be a hearing. There was always a hearing. The Empire demanded it. Outside the medical bay, the crowd had grown. Someone had set up a shrine of sorts, flowers and candles and toys arranged in patterns that meant remembrance in a dozen cultures. Children drew pictures on the walls in washable marker. Adults stood quiet vigil, taking shifts so the doorway was never empty. A young human woman, maybe 19, worked her way to the front. She held a baby, no more than 6 months old, wrapped in a blanket that said, "Serenity Now" in faded letters. She was in the module, the woman said, voice shaking. My daughter. I was on shift and she was with my mother, and I thought... She couldn't finish. Thank you. I don't have better words. Just, thank you. Lysaria reached out with her bandaged hand and touched the baby's cheek. The infant grabbed her finger and held on. What is her name? Lysaria asked. Hope, because we almost lost it. But you brought it back. The moment felt too large for the small room. Ronan stood aside, giving them space, watching Lysaria hold Hope in her burned hands. Hours later, the tribunal convened. Not in a formal court, but in the station's main atrium, hastily configured with broadcasting equipment. Every feed in the system carried it. Emperor Kaur appeared on screens, physically present in the observation deck, but addressing the proceedings remotely as if proximity might contaminate him. The charges were read. Failure to maintain proper dignity, unauthorized action during a crisis, violation of protocol, all the ways the Empire had of saying, "You didn't ask permission before saving lives." Kaur spoke, his voice cold as vacuum. The trial period has concluded. The princess will return to Vale Space immediately. The human has failed to demonstrate appropriate guardianship. Severn stood. His ruined hands hung at his sides, bandages stark white against his uniform. Majesty, I respectfully disagree. The silence could have shattered. Captain Severn, Kaur said, ice forming in syllables. You forget your place. No, sir, I am remembering it. Severn faced the screen, and his voice carried across every channel. I have served House Vile since I was 16 years old. I have been loyal without question, but loyalty that cannot recognize virtue is not service. It is blindness. He gestured to the crowd gathered in the atrium, to the 300 survivors wearing memorial ribbons. Princess Lysaria did not ask permission to be courageous. She simply was. She stood at a breaking point and chose to hold rather than flee. That is leadership. That is dignity. That is everything we claim to value in our empire, but only when it comes wrapped in acceptable forms. You dare lecture me on values. I dare testify to what I witnessed. And I witnessed humanity, Majesty. Not in the human. In your daughter. Who proved that courage does not require absence of fear. It requires choice despite it. The crowd murmured. On screens throughout the station, commentary feeds exploded with reaction. Kaur's face remained impassive, but something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation, politics, the recognition that public opinion, even in an empire, had gravity. The saboteur, Kaur said, changing tactics. This Cade, he will be found and prosecuted. Already located, a new voice interrupted. Station security had apprehended Cade's shuttle at the outer marker. They broadcast his face, defiant and sneering. I did what was necessary. Humans are a contamination. The princess proved it by debasing herself with manual labor. Ronan stepped forward, and his voice cut through the feed. You tried to murder 300 people to prove a point about purity. That's not philosophy. That's just being evil and pretentious about it. Cade sputtered. Security muted him. Lysaria rose from her medical chair, Ronan steadying her elbow. She faced her father's image with her bandaged hands visible, her burned shoulders straightening despite the pain. Father, I was sent as collateral, as currency. as proof of your power to diminish what displeases you." Her voice didn't shake. "I return as something else. As someone who chose her people over her protocol. If that shames you, then I am proud of that shame." Kaur looked at his daughter. Really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. She stood surrounded by people who had nothing to give her but gratitude. No land, no titles, no political advantage. Just love, raw and honest. "Majesty," Severn added quietly. "The people have chosen the princess. The station stands because she stood. That is not something you can undo with proclamations." The emperor was silent for 10 heartbeats. When he spoke, his voice carried a different weight. Resignation, maybe, or recognition. "The trial is concluded. Lysaria Vale is hereby named emissary to human territories, a position of her own making." He paused. "Take your station, daughter. You have earned it." The feed cut. The atrium erupted. Cheering, crying, people embracing. Severn saluted with his ruined hands. Ronan caught Lysaria as her knees buckled, holding her while she shook with relief and victory and the crushing weight of freedom. "You did it," he said into her hair. "We did it," she corrected. Then, quieter. "Can we go home now?" He knew which home she meant. The workshop, the city, the place where she'd first learned to laugh without permission. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go home." The tribunal wasn't finished. Kaur's concession had been political necessity, not capitulation. 3 days later, after Lysaria had recovered enough to travel, but not enough to stop hurting, the formal challenge of bond was convened. Tradition demanded it. The emperor had made a wager. The human had completed the trial, but tradition also gave Kaur one final chance to reclaim what he'd lost. A formal hearing where he could argue that the contract's conditions had been violated. The proceedings took place in the observation deck, converted into a makeshift court. Vile officials on one side, human representatives on the other, and a gallery full of station residents who'd earned their seats through survival. Kaur attended in person this time, physically present, which meant he was serious. Lysaria stood in the center of the room, bandages still visible under her formal robes. Ronan stood beside her, uncomfortable in borrowed formal wear that someone had insisted was required. Severn stood at attention despite his wrapped hands, present as witness. The emperor spoke first. The trial was meant to test guardianship, to determine if the human possessed adequate capability to protect what was entrusted to him. I argue that he failed. The princess was injured, placed in mortal danger, and exposed to situations no guardian should have permitted. A murmur ran through the assembly. Technically, he was right. Guardianship implied protection from harm, not throwing someone into harm's path. Ronan started to respond, but Lysaria touched his arm. This was hers to answer. "Father," she said, and the word carried years of complicated emotion. "You are correct. I was injured. I was placed in danger. I suffered pain I would not have experienced in the safety of the palace." Kaur's expression held grim satisfaction. "But you are also wrong, because a guardian's duty is not to cage what they protect. It is to enable it to become what it must be." She stepped forward, closer to her father, each movement visible effort. "You sent me as currency, an object to be returned undamaged. But damage is evidence of use, Father. I have scars now. Burns that will mark my shoulders forever. Do you know what they mean?" Silence. "They mean I mattered. That my body, the one you found excessive, the one your court mocked, had purpose beyond decoration. 300 people are alive because I was strong enough to hold them. That is not damage. That is definition." "You could have died," Kaur said, and for the first time his voice held something other than ice, something that might have been fear, old and buried. "Yes, I could have. So could they. The difference is, I got to choose." Ronan found his voice. Your Majesty, with respect, you set this trial up for me to fail. You wanted me to fail. You wanted proof that humans couldn't handle responsibility, that we're too chaotic, too emotional, too broken to matter in your empire. He met the Emperor's eyes. But here's what happened instead. Your daughter taught me that strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about knowing what you can carry and carrying it anyway. She didn't need me to protect her from the world. She needed me to stand beside her while she protected it. He turned to face Lysaria, speaking to her but knowing everyone was listening. So if you want to take her back, take her. But understand something. She's not a possession, not a prize, not currency. His voice roughened. She's my person, and I'm hers. That's the bond you're trying to judge. The room held its breath. An elderly creche in the gallery stood. I was in the housing module. I held my granddaughter while the structure broke around us. I saw the princess anchor herself to save us. I asked the court, what guardian would have forbidden that sacrifice? And what kind of daughter would have needed permission? Others stood. The young mother with baby Hope. The engineer who'd given them the first warning. A veil merchant who'd lost her shop but kept her life. One by one, they testified. Not to Ronan's guardianship, but to Lysaria's choice to use it. Severn approached the center of the floor, speaking formally now, using the old protocols. Emperor Kaur, I have served your house with loyalty that cost me family, home, and health. I have never questioned your commands. But I question this one, not because the human failed in his duty, but because you are attempting to punish success that does not look like you expected it to. Captain, the princess you sent away is not the princess who returns, Majesty. She is better. She discovered that her form has function, her weight has worth, her presence has power. These discoveries happened because the human did not cage her. He freed her. Severn's voice dropped. I have spent 20 years watching her dim herself to fit your court's standards. 3 days watching her burn bright? I know which version honors our empire more. Kaur stood, and the room fell silent. He walked slowly toward his daughter, and people unconsciously moved back, giving them space. Father and daughter faced each other. He was taller by half a head, but somehow she seemed to fill more of the room. When you were young, Kaur said quietly, you asked me why beauty was measured in angles, why softness was weakness, why your body was wrong. He paused. I had no answer then. I have none now, except that perhaps I was teaching you the wrong language. He turned to the assembly. The challenge of bond is withdrawn. Lysaria Vial is confirmed as emissary to human territories with full diplomatic status and autonomy. The trade agreements remain intact. The defense pacts stand. Relief washed through the room like a wave. But Kaur wasn't finished. He looked at Ronan. You defeated me, human, not in the trial, in something more important. You saw value where I saw excess. Perhaps that is the difference between fixing and breaking. He inclined his head, the barest fraction, the closest thing to apology a Vale emperor could manage. Then he left, robes trailing, and the room exhaled. Lysaria swayed. Ronan caught her. Around them, people cheered, but he only heard her whisper, Can we leave now? Please. Where do you want to go? She smiled against his shoulder. Home. I want to go home. The word meant something different now. Not the palace, not even Earth exactly. Home was wherever they stood together, building roads through impossible spaces. Later on Severn's ship heading back to Earth, Lysaria asked Ronan what he was thinking. I'm thinking my ex-wife was wrong, he said. I'm not just a man who fixes broken things. I'm a man who stands beside things while they fix themselves, which is better, I think. Lysaria rested her head on his shoulder, bandages and all. Much better. Behind them, Severn piloted in comfortable silence, his ruined hands steady on the controls, and ahead of them, Earth turned blue and green and beautiful, waiting to welcome its newest citizen home. 6 months later, New Orleans wore autumn like a comfortable jacket. The workshop on the waterline had expanded, sort of. Lysaria's office occupied the converted storage loft, papers and datapads arranged in organized chaos that would have horrified her father's staff, but suited her perfectly. The sign outside now read, Pike Salvage and Viale Cultural Mediation in 3 languages, though most people just called it the workshop where the princess works. She wasn't a princess anymore, technically. Officially, she was Emissary Lysaria Vale, which sounded important, but mostly meant she spent her days translating contracts, mediating trade disputes, and occasionally welding broken things while Ronan supervised. They'd become a fixture in the neighborhood, the tall alien woman with mercury hair and the welder with scarred hands, fixing boats and building bridges, literal and otherwise. Today the sky threatened rain. Heavy clouds rolled in from the Gulf, turning the air thick and electric. Lysaria stood on the balcony watching lightning fork the horizon, wearing the same battered jacket Ronan had given her that first day. It had been repaired 3 times, patched with material from 4 different planets, and she refused to replace it. Ronan found her there, holding 2 cups of coffee. Real coffee this time, from the place on Magazine Street that knew how she liked it. "Storm's coming?" he said. "Good. I like storms now." She took the coffee, sipped it, smiled. "Remember the first one, when I cried because I'd never seen weather that didn't care about propriety? I remember thinking you were the strangest, bravest person I'd ever met. Strange is generous. I was a disaster in formal wear. You were perfect." He said it simply, like stating a fact. "You are perfect." She turned to face him, and the look in her silver eyes made his breath catch. 6 months of working together, living in adjacent spaces, dancing around the thing they both felt but hadn't named. "Ronan," she said carefully, "that first day, on Argus, you gave me your jacket and said, 'Here, wind's cold.' Do you remember what you were thinking?" "I was thinking you looked like you needed something warm, something that gave a damn." "And later, after the trial, after everything, what were you thinking then?" He set down his coffee, took hers and set it aside too, so his hands were free to frame her face. "I was thinking that the universe is full of broken things that need fixing. And I was thinking that you weren't one of them. You were never broken, Lysaria. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't see straight." "And what do you see?" "Everything. I see someone who held the weight of 300 lives because she could. Someone who turned shame into strength. Someone who laughs at bad jokes and cries at good storms and looks at the world like every piece of it matters." He smiled. "I see home." She'd been called many things, excessive, abundant, wrong, but home was new. "People used to ask me," she said, voice soft, "what I would wish for if I could change my form. If I could be properly Vale, angular, ascetic, acceptable." Her hands found his. "I don't know when I stopped wishing for that. Maybe when a welder from Louisiana saw me and offered his jacket. Maybe when I learned that treasure is just another word for something you'd die to keep safe. Lysaria, let me finish, please." She took a breath. "You told your emperor that I was your person. Did you mean it?" "Every word." "Then I need to tell you something. In Vael, we have a phrase, Kethaval Mar. It means the weight that centers, the thing you carry that makes you steady instead of burdened. And Ronan, you are my Kethaval Mar. You are the weight that makes me whole." The rain started, soft at first, then harder, turning the river silver and the air cool. Neither of them moved to go inside. "I love you," she said, speaking the words in English because some truths needed translation. "I love you, and I am terrified that you will wake up one day and realize you rescued something that's too much work to keep." He kissed her then in the rain, while New Orleans hummed around them and thunder rolled approval. When he pulled back, His smile was crooked and sure. You want to know what I realized? After Argus, after everything, I realized that my ex-wife was right about one thing. I am a man who fixes broken things, but she was wrong about what that made me. He touched Lysaria's cheek, traced the faint scar on her shoulder from the burns. It makes me someone who sees value in what others discard. And you, Lysaria Vale, are the most valuable thing I've ever found. Not in spite of what you are, because of it. Even the excessive parts? Especially those. Because excessive just means there's more to love. And I've got time. She laughed, bright and free, the sound she'd learned to make in his city, in his world, in the space they'd built together. They kissed again, longer this time. While rain drummed the roof and the river rose, and somewhere far away, on a station orbiting a gas giant, 300 people carried memorial ribbons and told their children about the day a princess became human. Downstairs, the workshop door opened. Severn stepped in, shaking rain from his cloak, his scarred hands steadying a package. He'd been visiting regularly, officially as the Vale liaison to Earth, unofficially because he'd admitted, 3 drinks in at a jazz bar, that he'd never had friends before. Humans were teaching him how. I come bearing gifts, he called up the stairs. Though if I'm interrupting something, I can stand in the rain looking dignified. Lysaria laughed, pulling Ronan toward the stairs. Come up, Captain, you're family now. That means you don't get to be dignified anymore. Later, after Severn left with promises to return for a Sunday dinner, after the rain softened to mist, Ronan and Lysaria sat on the balcony, wrapped in blankets, watching the city glow. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Staying here, being someone new? Every identity is someone new, she said. I was one person in the palace, another person on Argus, and here, I am someone I choose to be. She leaned into him. That's not regret. That's freedom. A passing boat blew its horn, jazz drifted from Frenchman Street, and somewhere a child laughed in a language that mixed 3 worlds. You know what the best part is? Lysaria said. My father sent me here to prove human inadequacy, to demonstrate that your people were too chaotic, too emotional, too broken to handle responsibility. And instead, I learned that chaos is creativity, that emotion is strength, that being broken is just the first step toward becoming something better. She smiled. Humanity didn't fix me, Ronan. It gave me permission to fix myself. And that's the most dangerous thing you could have taught someone from an empire built on control. Dangerous? Contagious. There are 17 Vale citizens who've applied for cultural exchange programs this month. Severn started teaching combat classes at a community center. My father's advisors are quietly panicking because young nobles are asking why emotions are weakness if humans conquered half the galaxy while crying about it. Ronan laughed. We're infecting your empire with feelings. With hope, with choice, with the radical idea that worth isn't measured in angles but in actions. She turned to face him fully. You asked me once what angry sky meant in Vale. There's no translation because we don't let skies be angry. We don't let anything be wild or broken or excessive. But here, in this city, on this planet, I learned that wildness is vitality, that broken things can be beautiful, that excess is just abundance waiting to be appreciated. The city lights reflected in her silver eyes, turning them gold and warm. Humanity, fuck yeah, she said, testing the phrase Ronan had taught her. Is that appropriate here? Perfect timing. She kissed him again, softer now, tasting like coffee and rain and tomorrow. And in the end, this was the truth that saved Argus, changed empires, and rewrote what it meant to be Guardian. It wasn't the wager that defined her. It was the choice. And it wasn't force that saved 300 lives. It was the weight of humanity placed exactly where it needed to be, by someone who'd learned that excess and treasure are sometimes the same thing, depending on who's looking. In his workshop on the waterline, surrounded by broken things becoming whole. Ronan Pike held his person close and understood what it meant to be rich, not in credits or contracts or imperial favor, in this, in her, in the stubborn, beautiful belief that what's broken can be fixed, what's excessive can be essential, and what's human is worth fighting for. Every single time. In the end, humanity wasn't a species. It was a verb, the act of showing up when everything's falling apart, of holding on when logic says to let go. Ronan didn't save an empire because he was stronger. Lysaria didn't change one because she was perfect. They both did it because they refused to believe that broken meant done. And maybe that's the most human thing there is, to look at a collapsing world and say, "Give me a minute, I can fix this." But what about you? When was the last time you mistook someone's excess for their strength? Would you have seen treasure where others saw flaw? And if the universe gave you something imperfect to protect, a person, a dream, a planet, would you hold it long enough to make it whole again? If you stayed with us until this moment, write the word abundance in the comments, because that's what this story was really about. The courage to be too much in a world that asks you to be less. Tell us where you're watching from, Earth, Luna, or maybe just somewhere between storms. And subscribe to join this little human rebellion across the stars. Hit like, share it with someone who believes in fixing what's worth saving, and don't forget to catch the next story on the card now glowing on your screen. Because in the multiverse, there's always another broken thing waiting to be loved back to life.